There are places the world forgets, and sometimes they forget on purpose. Out here, halfway between New Zealand and South America, the ocean keeps its own secrets. In the middle of this great emptiness, a single speck of land rises from the water like a wound that never healed. They call it Pitcairn Island, barely 2 miles wide. Population, less than 50 souls. No airport, no harbor deep enough for ships. Just cliffs, salt wind, and the echo of a name whispered through generations. Christian, Young, Quintal, Warren. Every family here shares those same names, because every family here shares the same blood. To the British Crown, Pitcairn is just a dot, a forgotten territory clinging to life. But beneath the palms and the coral, there's something darker buried in its soil. 2 centuries of silence, 2 centuries of sin turned into custom. Once this was meant to be a paradise, a place where men could flee from tyranny and start anew. But what they built instead was a prison without bars, an island cut off from time and from mercy. Imagine being born where the only faces you know carry your own bloodline, where history repeats not by choice, but by design. This is not just a story of isolation. It's a story of inheritance, of what happens when rebellion births its own curse. Somewhere out there, the sea still guards what's left of them, a people forgotten by the world, but chained to their own beginning. So, tonight, we return to the island that shouldn't exist, a paradise made of ash, a bloodline carved from guilt. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop your location in the comments. And if the dark corners of human history call to you, subscribe to Underbelly Bloodline, where we uncover the stories the world tried to bury. It began not as a crime, but as a fever. In the year 1789, aboard the British vessel HMS Bounty, order broke, and something ancient rose from beneath the skin of men. They'd been sent to collect breadfruit from Tahiti, the Crown's newest crop for its colonies. But months at sea, under the unrelenting eye of Captain William Bligh, turned discipline into torment. The lash, the hunger, the endless salt. And somewhere between duty and madness, the crew began to dream of freedom. Among them was Fletcher Christian, the officer who would choose defiance over loyalty. He'd seen the beauty of Tahiti, the laughter, the warmth, the unshackled air of a place untouched by the Empire's cruelty. And he wanted it back. So, one black dawn, while the sea groaned and the ship drifted in silence, Christian made his choice. Bligh was seized, dragged from his cabin, his voice swallowed by the wind. The mutineers cut the ropes that held the captain's small launch, sending him and 18 loyal men adrift into the endless Pacific. Their cries faded beneath the roar of the waves. The HMS Bounty, once a symbol of the Crown's reach, became a ghost. Its masts burned against the black water, fire reflecting in the eyes of the men who had damned themselves. They watched their past turn to ash and believed they'd been reborn. But freedom, as they would learn, is a fragile thing. They fled across the Pacific, hunted, haunted, until at last they found a place no map dared mark. A volcanic island, sharp as a blade, lost in an ocean of silence. Pitcairn, here they thought they'd found sanctuary. But what they really found was isolation. And isolation breeds its own kind of rot. The mutiny may have lit the fuse, but the explosion was still to come. They burned their ship to disappear, but some fires never go out. Tell me, if you'd been aboard that night, would you have stayed loyal to the Crown, or joined the men who chose the darkness? At first, it must have felt like grace. After months adrift between mutiny and madness, they had found it, a patch of green clinging to black rock, an island no man had ever claimed. Pitcairn. To the weary eyes of the mutineers, it was salvation itself, the end of pursuit, the beginning of peace. 9 British sailors, 6 Tahitian men, 12 Tahitian women. That was all. 27 souls standing on the edge of the known world, believing they could start again. They built huts from palm and driftwood. They planted gardens in the volcanic soil. Children were born under the wide Pacific sky, and for a moment, a fleeting one, it looked like a paradise reborn. But paradise is fragile, and men carry their ghosts with them, even to the ends of the earth. The island was too small for pride, too quiet for secrets. There were too few women, and too much desire. The same blood that had rebelled against a captain now turned against itself. Whispers began, of jealousy, of broken vows, of men claiming what was never theirs. The Tahitian men, once partners in survival, became servants, then enemies. Love curdled into ownership. Freedom, that bright word they had burned a ship for, twisted into something darker. The soil that once gave them food began to take blood instead. One by one, the peacekeepers fell. The first murders were quick, acts of passion, of rage, but they would not be the last. By the time the storms broke over Pitcairn, the island was no longer Eden. It was exile. Even in paradise, the human heart will find a reason to destroy itself. They thought they'd escaped the world, but they carried the world inside them. Paradise always rots from within, and on Pitcairn it began with the simplest sin, the promise of warmth in a bottle. They called it rum, but it was more poison than comfort. Distilled from the island's sweet roots and fruit, it brought a kind of fever, one that loosened tongues and unchained tempers. By nightfall, the laughter turned to shouting. The men, sailors, mutineers, murderers, began to see ghosts in each other's eyes. The Tahitian men, who'd once been brought as companions, were treated like prisoners now, their women taken, their anger simmering. In a place too small to run, revenge becomes a circle, and that circle began to close. One morning, the island woke to screams. Knives flashed in the palm huts, and blood soaked into the soil that had once fed them. Men fell on men, friends became executioners, and when the smoke cleared, the so-called paradise was silent again, save for the waves washing the blood from the shore. By 1800s, only one man remained alive, John Adams. He stood among the wreckage, the bodies buried, the rum pots smashed, surrounded only by women and children who looked to him for salvation. Maybe it was guilt, or maybe it was fear of divine punishment. But something in Adams broke open. He gathered the survivors, built a small chapel from driftwood and coral, and taught them to pray. He preached repentance, spoke of forgiveness, redemption, God's mercy. And for a time, they believed him. But no church can stand when its foundation is soaked in blood. The ghosts of the mutineers were still there, in the soil, in the names, in the bloodline itself. You can build walls, raise crosses, and sing hymns. But the sins of a place like this never leave. They simply learn to whisper quieter. When the killing stopped, life returned. But it was not the same kind of life. On Pitcairn Island, death had cleared the ground for something new to grow. From the blood of mutineers and the tears of their widows, a strange lineage took root. The children of that broken paradise became the island's future and its curse. John Adams taught them scripture and survival. He named them, baptized them, and married them, often to one another. In a place where no new faces ever arrived, the island became a closed circle, folding in upon itself like the tide. Christian, Young, Quintal, Warren Brown. Names repeated like a prayer or a warning. As the decades passed, every birth was another loop in the same bloodline. Cousins became husbands. Nieces became wives. Generations blurred until everyone carried the same faces, the same eyes, the same jawlines, the same buried tempers. The islanders told themselves it was just the way of things. But beneath the hymns and the harvests, a quiet deformity was growing, not in the flesh, but in the spirit. A people born from rebellion now bound by blood, their destiny sealed long before they were old enough to question it. There was no one to stop it. No outsiders to question what was sacred or what was profane. Pitcairn had become a living experiment, a world reduced to a family, and a family reduced to a myth. Their history was their prison, their names were their inheritance, and their children were the proof that no sin truly disappears. It only changes form. In the end, the bloodline became the island itself, a serpent feeding on its own tail, generation after generation, until even memory forgot where it began. And though centuries have passed, the names still echo across that lonely rock. The Christians, the Youngs, the Quintals, each carrying both the sin and the survival of those first men who burned their ship to the sea. By the dawn of the 20th century, the world had changed, but Pitcairn had not. While cities grew electric and nations went to war, this lonely rock in the Pacific remained frozen in its own reflection, a place where time drifted slower than the tides, and memory never died. Radio signals rarely reached its cliffs. Mail arrived only when the sea allowed. Once a year, perhaps, a ship would appear, bringing medicine, supplies, and curious outsiders who wanted a glimpse of the descendants of the mutineers. They'd smile for photographs, shake the islanders' hands, and leave believing they'd found a piece of lost paradise. But paradise is only beautiful when you don't live inside it. Behind the palm trees and polite smiles, something older was still breathing, something that had survived the centuries. The silence. It was a silence that swallowed confession, a silence that turned wrong into custom. Every family knew it, every child felt it. It was passed down like a surname, the understanding that you don't speak, you endure. Alcohol became communion, violence became rhythm, and trauma, that invisible inheritance, became law. Fathers drank, mothers prayed, and daughters learned too early what it meant to be quiet. Generations blurred, just as they always had, but now the decay was internal, a kind of rot no outsider could see. To those who visited, Pitcairn was quaint. To those who lived there, it was a tomb that sang lullabies. Each face carried the same familiar shadow, the same eyes that had once looked upon fire and blood 2 centuries before. And so, the island waited, pretending peace, pretending purity, while the ghosts beneath its soil whispered the truth, that the rebellion had never ended. It had only gone quiet. Generations later, the ocean still guards their secret, not with waves, but with silence, the kind that hums in your bones and reminds you, some bloodlines are not meant to fade. For 200 years, Pitcairn had lived in silence, a silence so old it became nature, the sound between the wind and the waves. But by the 1900s, whispers began to drift beyond the reef, soft voices, broken English, stories that didn't sound like folklore. They sounded like confession. It began with letters, small, desperate things that reached the British authorities, reports from women and children. Each one painted a picture that the island had spent generations denying. When investigators first read them, they thought it was madness or myth. But myths don't bleed, and so, across half the world, the British police prepared for a journey few dared to make. In 2000, they landed on Pitcairn, armed not with weapons, but with questions. The islanders watched from the cliffs as foreign uniforms stepped onto their sand, bringing with them the weight of a reckoning that had been centuries late. Behind every locked door lay the same story, a story that everyone already knew. Abuse wasn't an incident here, it was inheritance. Passed down, normalized, ritualized, woven into the daily life of an island that had no outsiders, no escape, and no witness. It's just how life is here. Her words became the island's confession, not screamed, but whispered. A surrender born not of guilt, but exhaustion. Because when an entire world is made of family, who do you accuse when the wound comes from within? The investigation peeled back the island's history like rotting bark. What the world saw as paradise was revealed for what it truly was. A sealed experiment in silence, where generations had blurred morality until pain became ordinary. Trials followed, convictions, names that once traced back to the mutineers, Christian, Young, Warren, now inked in court files instead of family Bibles. And as the gavel fell, the sea kept its rhythm, unconcerned, unchanging. Pitcairn's silence was broken. But what was left to say when the truth had lived there all along? By 2004, Pitcairn Island had run out of places to hide. The investigation had cracked open the myths, and now, after 2 centuries of silence, justice had finally come ashore. 13 men stood accused, half the island's adult male population. In any other place, that would mean a few names on a list. Here, it meant fathers, brothers, uncles, sons. There was no jury of strangers, only bloodlines staring across the room at themselves. The names read aloud in court sounded familiar, almost ancestral. Christian, Young, Brown Quintal, Warren. They were not just surnames, they were the island's DNA. Descendants of mutineers who once fled the reach of empire, now bound again by its judgment. History had come full circle. The rebellion that once burned the Bounty now burned its own descendants. Each testimony pulled another thread from the island's soul. Stories of childhood stolen, silence taught as duty, pain accepted as inheritance. The British magistrates called it law. But what unfolded inside that tin-roofed courthouse felt older, something almost biblical. An island cursed by its own creation, bearing the weight of sins too old to name. Some received sentences, others exile. Yet even as the gavel fell, many islanders whispered that the foreigners would never understand. Outsiders see evil, they said, but this is just how life was built here. The flag still waved, its fabric stained by the mist of the Pacific, a symbol of empire standing over a colony that time itself had forgotten. But beneath it, something deeper had shifted. The island's innocence, its illusion, had been stripped away. Pitcairn was no longer a paradise. It was a mirror held up to humanity's oldest curse, the cycle of sin we pretend not to see when it wears a familiar face. When justice finally arrives to a place built on secrecy, is it mercy or just another kind of punishment? Halfway between nowhere and never, there still stands a piece of the past, clinging to the rocks like a memory too stubborn to fade. This is Pitcairn Island. Population, fewer than 50, all of them bound by the same blood. Once, this place was a rebellion's reward, a secret refuge carved from the heart of the ocean. Now, it's a relic. Every surname on the island, Christian, Young, Quintal, Warren, Brown, is a fading echo of the mutiny that began in fire. The soil grows thinner each year. The gardens once rich with breadfruit and taro now struggle against salt and time. Children have grown old without leaving. The young have left without returning. And still, the island breathes, a ghost that refuses to die. The British flag still flutters above the hill, but it feels more like a memorial than a symbol. No tourists, no ships, but the supply vessel that arrives once or twice a year. Even the ocean seems to hesitate here, as if it too remembers the sins whispered across these cliffs. They say the dead speak through the wind on Pitcairn, that when the storm rolls in from the east, you can still hear the voices of the mutineers, laughing, shouting, praying for salvation they never found. Because this island was never paradise. It was a promise made in desperation, and broken by the very blood that kept it alive. Now, Pitcairn stands as both monument and warning, proof of what happens when isolation becomes inheritance, and the search for freedom turns into a prison of one's own making. The sea will take it someday. The names will vanish into tide and coral, and all that will remain is a story of men who burned their ship to escape the world, only to rebuild its sins in miniature. Every family carries a secret. Pitcairn just never had anywhere to hide theirs. In 1789, they burned their ship to disappear. The flames danced against the night, a promise and a curse. The HMS Bounty sank beneath the waves, and with it, the last thread connecting these men to the world they left behind. But fire has a way of surviving. It hides in the blood, in the stories we tell, in the sins we refuse to name aloud. 2 centuries later, the flames still burn, not on the sea, but inside the people who remain. You can see it in their eyes, that same restless defiance, the same hunger for freedom that turned to ruin long ago. Pitcairn is more than an island. It's a mirror, a reflection of what happens when isolation becomes inheritance, when the search for freedom curdles into confinement. Here, rebellion became routine, survival became ritual, and sin became law. They thought they had escaped civilization. But the truth is, you can't burn away what lives inside the human heart. When we flee the world to escape its sins, do we truly leave them behind? Or do they follow us, whispering through our bloodlines, waiting for the next quiet island to take root? The story of Pitcairn isn't just history. It's a warning, a reminder that no matter how far we run, we carry the fire with us. Underbelly Bloodline, the fire never went out.